Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Hi, I'm Danielle Fisher. I'm a researcher here at Microsoft Research in data visualization, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest speaker today. Narges Mayar is joining us from the University of British Columbia, where she's working with old friends in CSCW like Kelly Booth on really interesting work around architecture and visualization design. She's before that from the University of Victoria, where she worked with Melanie Torrey, and she'll be talking today about designing collaborative visual analytics tools. I'd like to pass it on to Narges.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Dan. So, I'm very excited to be here today and to talk about collaborative visual analytic tools and to share my experience from designing these tools to supporting and empowering experts and analysts to my current line of research, which is more to engaging public and this diverse range of people who don't necessarily have experience with visualization or a domain itself. So a little bit background about myself. I'm coming from a very interdisciplinary background. I got my bachelor in electrical engineering, and then I switched to computer science as I found it more interesting to do more innovative and creative tools. And there was also a stronger reason for this switch. I have a fine art background, and I was always very passionate to somehow combine these two. So I thought, and I found information visualization a great use of, to bringing my personal and professional background and interest together. Here are some samples of my fine art work. I have spent many years learning about different styles of painting, from principles of drawing and painting in realism style to more, modern style like expressionism, impressionism, collage, abstract. But the question that is really interesting to the computer science audiences, and my desire has been always to combine these two knowledge together, but more in line with my current line of research, is how we can reach beyond CS audiences by bringing more design elements into visualization and also collaboration technology. So here's what I do in terms of research. I design, develop, and evaluate novel interaction and visualization technology, specifically for groups to solve complex problems when the problems get really complex and people have to come together and make decisions. My work is in human-computer interaction. I really enjoy working a lot with human subjects to understand their issues and challenges regarding the use of technology and how we can improve that. But more specifically, it's collaborative visual analytics, which, as you know, it's a subset of CSCW as well as visualization and visual analytics. And I'm really interested to study and understand this, communication between people to people and their communication with technology and visualization, and how they understand this underlying data and they derive insight from the data. So how we can make that information more accessible and more meaningful for this user. My work is very interdisciplinary, and I have been working, and it can be applied in different domains. For example, my PhD research was funded by SAP Business Objects. So I worked very closely with their experts from there, with researchers as well as analysts, to understand their needs in business domain when they had to, gather around the table together and solve their problems. And then I have also worked in intelligence analysis, and more recently, as Daniel said, I'm working in built environment with close collaboration with faculty members from urban planning as well as civil engineering, as they do have a lot of examples of this close collaboration scenario when they don't have enough, collaborative and visualization technology to support their tasks. So my research approach and method, I try to bring them together is first to understand the domain-specific problem. So I spent a lot of time with domain experts to understand their challenges and needs, and I do that through different, methods such as ethnography, observational user study, as well as case study, to work with experts and understand their needs and challenges, how they want everything to be changed. And then I go to the whole process of system building, from prototyping to designing, implementing, and deploying. And for the evaluation of those tools, which is a central part of my research as well, I go through qualitative as well as quantitative evaluation methods. So I try to bring a very visual summary of main contribution, the research that I've been leading so far. This is an information visualization research, which I did during my master's, and it was a creativity support tools to help creative advertiser to come up with their language for their ads. So this tool would bring the most relevant words and sentences from internet and would present them in very thought-provoking, stimulating kind of way to help them to create an ad. And then I started my PhD with Melanie when she got this large interactive surfaces, and I was very excited to design tools for this. But we decided to first go with an observational study to understand what are the challenges of a small group of people when they're working around these large interactive surfaces. And through this observational study, we understand that note-taking is a critical activity that happens around from this framework that we propose, and it hasn't been supported with visual analytic tools. So with that, the next phase of my PhD was designing a tool tailor-made for tabletop, and with considering all the principles for designing for tabletops, such as fluid interaction and territoriality, bringing those individual as well as group workspaces and transition between collaboration style, but also it integrated a note-taking and visual history module, which they can go back and revisit their visual history, which was linked to their notes, and it really helped them to do their task better. And then last piece of my PhD, which I'm going to describe in more details today, was CLIP, which was an awareness mechanism method that we proposed to help this co-located analysts to do their task more effectively by sharing the analysis results, basically. And then this is more current research that I'm conducting at UBC in built environment and community planning, which is a multidisciplinary table center application to help people and engage public in the process of participatory urban design. And then lastly, this is a short paper that I presented last year at Personal Visualization at VIS, and it was about we need to actually gain a better understanding of engagement if we are trying to measure engagement and report engagement of visual analytic tools. So I don't have to go over details for all of them, but I would be happy to take questions and talk to you about any of those research afterward. So today I will start with a brief introduction and challenges of collaborative visual analytics, and the two projects that I picked today was one of them from my PhD, which was to supporting and empowering analysts, and the other one is to engaging public to this domain. So I wanted to address these two different spectrum, and I'll go over my contributions, and finally I'll sum up with my vision and directions for our future. So the question is, why collaborative visual analytics at all? Here, with the complex information that we have, we see more and more the scenarios that people have to get together and share their expertise to solve complex problems. So, as you all know, collaboration has a lot of advantages, like people can share their diverse background and expertise, and it can help with the quality of work, lessen the individual biases, and helps with the task load, sharing the task load. But when we pair it with visual analytics and visualization, we basically empower a group to go to this data and understand and explore the underlying meaning from the data. So it helps them to interactively explore those data and make better decisions. And we are going to see a lot more examples of this collaborative work in the future. But of course, it comes with a lot of challenges. For example, the first one and the most obvious one is users. We are dealing with multiple users. And sometimes, for example, when you're designing for experts, they know their domain. But sometimes when you're dealing with public, they're coming from this really diverse range of stakeholders with different background, expertise, expectations, objectives. So it's really, really harder and more challenging to design for them. And then, supporting cognition of a group has been always one of the grand challenges in collaborative visual analytics, as sense-making has been stated as grand challenges. How do we understand how group make a decision and how they gain insight from the data and how we can better support that? And then how they want to share their insight and analytical outcomes, and what are the best ways to support that is another challenge as well. Evaluation has been always one of the greatest challenges in this field. How do we evaluate these visual analytic tools, especially when it comes with all the social interactions that happening around this data? How do we evaluate that? And then visual representation. This is also another challenge. So when it comes to different display environment and multiple display, this poses the question of how do we design this different display, and how we are going to build interaction techniques with this different display. So switching to the first project today is CLIP, which won the Best Paper Award at VAST 2014. And I think this was because they noted this project as an exemplary user study because of the methods that we used and the massive, massive amount of qualitative research, qualitative data that we went through, and all the metrics that we proposed for the evaluation. So CLIP was a prototype tool that I designed and built for, and I would like to call it a collaborative thinking space. So it was an environment to help people to record and then organize to be able to better share it with group members and share it with their collaborators. So this was one of the problems that has been stated in collaborative sense-making for a while. We wanted to really test this idea. So as I mentioned, the bigger picture was supporting collaborative sense-making, but more specifically, how to support externalizations. And by externalization, I mean everything that they externalize from the data. It could be findings, like some values or findings that they find through their visualization, but it could be a cue about what to do next for the course of analysis, or a question for collaborators, or hypotheses. So externalizing all of those and be able to share them when necessary was our questions, and we wanted to see the effect of this tool on collaboration mechanics. This project was partly motivated by Canberra, which was built here by Petra and Daniel, and their goal was to build this tabletop co-located collaborative environment for people to go over documents. And they work a lot in, the searching ways of phasing of sense making, how people search for, keywords, and how do they see who has found different, documents. But they didn't provide any support for externalization. And they speculated that supporting for externalization can help groups to come up with better results. And this was also well grounded in literature. Many other researchers has been stated that, but it wasn't tested before, so we wanted to test the idea. And to give you a better context about the task, we chose one of the vast challenges, which is kind of standard data set and scenario to evaluate the visual analytic tools. And it was a mystery task. It was challenging because there were like 240 documents, and they had such a limited time to go through all of them, and there were a lot of misleading facts. So it was just really easy to come up with wrong hypotheses and insight from the data. And then the scenario itself would give them a cue to find the first relevant document out of this 240, but it was their own jobs to search and find other related documents and connect those facts to solve the case. So the core idea of CLIP was what we called linked common work, or LCW. And this was basically the idea of we can automatically identify and then visually present all of the common work to help them to gain better awareness of who's doing what at any given moment. And it came to two different modes, partial merging as well as full merging. To give you a better idea of how this works, I created this very simplified version of CLIP here. So imagine, as you saw through the picture, they were sitting around the table using their own machines. So imagine this is Laura's machine, and she's working with Alex and Mary at this time. And each of them have given a distinguishable color, so you can see and trace everyone's work. So here's Laura, and she started recording stuff based on what she wants. For example, George is a suspicious person in this case. He can play an important role. And then she finds out about a club, and those little circles about those nodes indicate how many evidence or documents, articles she has found based on to support her results. And then she finds a relation between these two. Bingo. So George works for club. He can be a key person in this. But here's where the partial merging comes. And the idea was with those little visual glyphs, we can give them an idea of what the other collaborators, so those blue ones is associated with Alex. So Laura understands that Alex has also found about George and Club, and for each of them he has stated one evidence or document.
So was that because he saw the organization and added them to that, or was it done separately? I'm just not sure how the blue things ended up there.
This was the mechanism that we look at each person's workspace, and if there's any common work.
So Alex also had a George.
Yes.
Got it.
And also had Club, and also had had recorded one document for each of them, whereas like Laura has found 2 documents for George, so they can also go over each other's document for validation purpose. And then here, if Laura gets interested to see what else Alex has found, she have this option to tick for full merging. And full merging is where she can see the rest of Alex's work at this time. And by that, she figures out that George is a member of ISPS, which is a terrorism organization. And from here, they can really coordinate their task better together and communicate more effectively.
This isn't what the UI looks like. Or is this what the UI looks like?
This is very similar.
Okay.
It's more complex. It has more, coordinated views, but it comes with this node link graph idea, and it's because in intelligence analysis, many times they would like to go with node link graph.
So are you going to show us somewhere where the real user interface is?
Yes,
Like,
I will. Did you have a question?
Yeah. What does it mean by not having a dot for the box? Does it mean that there's no evidence to support
Yes.
the relation?
He didn't record any evidence. They were supposed to record their evidences because we were interested to see how they go over those evidences and coordinate. But for this one, for any reason, he didn't support evidence there. But they had the option to do that. So here's a very quick, video of CLIP where you see the the main interface. And the idea was this is a collaborative visual thinking space rather than, going through the data.
CLIP is a collaborative visual thinking space to support collaborative sense making. CLIP allows analysts to record their findings in the form of node-link graph and timeline, add evidence to keep track of where findings came from, and add free-form text to record hypotheses, questions, to-do lists, etc. Most importantly, CLIP automatically discovers and links common work to relate and integrate findings of different collaborators.
It wasn't quite obvious, but all those, views were coordinated. So if you would click on any of those nodes, you would see the related node or evidence and the timeline item as well.
One quick question. So I think goes into the set visualization because there were 3 people, but you are showing me just 2 people, right? For partial, so you basically show
Yes.
intersection or...
Yes, it's because before Mary starts to, to record any common work, you don't see Mary's work unless there is something in common. But if you want to see Mary's work, there were tabs above the workspace, which you can click on those tabs and remotely see Mary's work. But the reason you don't see it in Laura's workspace is because Mary hasn't still recorded anything that is in common with either Mary, or either Laura, or Alex.
If there are, say, 5 analysts working together, then how does it show?
Yeah,
Because
can we go
with
back
5
to the-
people,
Yeah,
there are...
let's see the
It was
video
way
again.
too
Put to the
complicated for how
five.
fast you
Yeah,
showed
yeah,
that.
let's see it
Sorry
again.
about, yes, I should have brought a sure.
CLIP is a collaborative visual thinking space to support collaborative sense making.
Sorry, I should.
CLIP is a collaborative
I
visual thinking
cannot-
space
It's okay.
to
I cannot
support
mute
You can
that.
check
collaborative
later. I'm
sense
just
making.
curious how it is.
Yes,
I-
saved
I-
in
I-
this
I-
number.
Finish and then just keep it on the
So-
slide. Yeah.
So what was your?
Now we're seeing nothing,
Yeah, just let it run through and then give some
Because
feedback.
it'll start
It'll
playing.
stop on the slide, on the
It
UI.
does.
Yeah, just let it run. It'll be.
CLIP is a collaborative visual thinking space to support collaborative sense making.
Interesting.
CLIP allows analysts to record their findings
Doesn't
in the
let me
form
to
of
stop.
node-link graph
Okay, just let it
and
go.
timeline, add evidence to keep track of where findings came from, and add free-form text to record hypotheses, questions, to-do lists, etc. Most importantly, CLIP automatically discovers and links
Do
common
you see
work
the link
to
in between
relate and
these 3
integrate
items here?
findings of
So
different
it's when you
collaborators.
click on.
Oh,
Was
Okay.
it?
I thought
No.
it was gonna sit there.
Yeah. Okay, good. But it's
Too
good to see the
complicated
second
to
time.
understand, but okay.
Can I go over your question one more?
Yeah, maybe when we meet, we can walk through it real slowly.
Sure. So for the evaluation of this link common work, I decided to conduct an experimental comparison between CLIP and a baseline which doesn't have LCW notion to see how this LCW will affect their work. So for the baseline tool is like for the only way for Laura to see what's going on Alex's work is to click on the tab above its workspace and see remotely what's Alex has been doing. But there's no notion of, bringing common work together. And it's a lot more cognitive load to see what's going on in this space where there is no linking. So that was based on this Clark and Brennan theory as well for, lessen the cognitive load on users. So for the user study, I recruited 16 groups of 3, which wasn't a trivial task. So 8 groups in each condition. And then they worked for 90 minutes, as I mentioned, and they were randomly assigned to CLIP or baseline. And this process was video recorded and followed up by a semi-structured interview. And I was there to answer their questions and take notes and observe, and also to do the follow-up interview. So we had quite a few hypotheses for this study. these are the informal version, but the more formal version can be found in paper. So we hypothesize that linked common work will improve performance. Communication, it helped them to better coordinate their tasks, and it will increase awareness. So metrics and analysis, this was one of the challenges of this work for sure. How to find metrics to, for example, measure awareness, which is not easy to measure. So for the performance, we followed the same scoring scheme that Eisenberg et al. Used, and it was like positive points for correct hypotheses and negative ones for incorrect hypotheses and findings, and also the number of key documents that they found through this large data set. And then for the other hypotheses, we went through this massive qualitative work where we transcribed all of those videos, and we went over this conversational analysis, which is also roots back in social sciences. So we started to, coding and recording all of their conversations until we came up with a set of codes for our hypotheses. And we had 2 coders, and we spent a lot of time in this data analysis. Yes, 520 hours.
10 hours a week for a year.
It was really massive amount of work. Some people find it tedious. I found it still interesting to go over, people's interaction and see how they form groups and subgroups and how they talk through and use the visualization, but it was really tedious at the same time. So this is the metric schemes that we came up. For example, we distinguished all the discussions which were relevant to the solving the task, or were they like verbally reporting a hypothesis that they generated. And then because using and referring to tool was important for us, we also coded all the instances for referring to visualization, all the verbal instances of coordinating the task together. And for awareness, we realized it's really hard to measure awareness. How about we look for instances for lack of awareness, which seems more reasonable to code. So anytime that they were seeking for awareness or there was a lack of awareness, like what's going on your surface, on your workspace function, because I couldn't see and follow up what's going on her work, especially in baseline, we coded that. And we also noticed that they verbalized findings a lot. It was an intense session, and they were really engaged with tasks. We wanted to, get the incentives and win the prize, so they were really competitively working on solving the task. So they were verbalizing findings constantly to, coordinate the task. And there were some times that people were reporting their, findings, and again there was like, what did you just said? Because they were so immersed in the task, they couldn't remember all of those verbalization. And then others. So
I had a question about that. You keep saying we. How many people were doing this coding?
two independent coders.
And you did Cohen's, Kappa, and make sure.
Quick-Matrosa.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay, good.
Yes. So unfortunately, I won't have time to go through all the hypotheses and results. But for example, the first one was better performance. And here, clip groups are represented by blue. You can see the significant differences between clip group versus baseline. The clip group were also able to find the more key documents through this time because they had a better coordination.
So what was the baseline?
The baseline was without the partial merging or full merging. So the only way for them to see what's going on each other's workspace was to go through those tabs.
Oh, so individual ones only.
Yes.
Okay.
And just to be clear, the tabs would hide the other stuff, so you couldn't actually separate out and see the other person's stuff while you were doing it at all. It was just,
No.
okay.
You had to switch back and forth between
Got
them.
it.
This is how these
Sure.
tabs and lens notion has been used so far mostly. Yes.
So then, building on that actually, when you're looking at this collaborative system in the clip, on the clip side, and I want to bring in your data, let us say that you have arranged George and Club horizontally, and I've arranged George and Club vertically. What did you do for layout?
Exactly. That was one of the questions. So we allow people to freely, create their layout as they wanted to. And then when you were like clicking on Alex's tab to see, this was his own layout. So it was different from yours, and you would just see what exactly, it's like looking over the shoulder and see what's going on Alex's workspace.
But in Clip World, you still had to merge somehow, right?
Yes, so our problem was this, bringing this spatial, thing together. So bringing all the common work and rearranging whole diagram around the center around the common work.
Which means in turn that I could not say to you, hey, I've got both of our stuff up, and I see that over to the right here, because your right might be totally different from mine.
Yes. So we thought it's much easier for each person if we center based on his own or her own layout, and then we bring common work based on the layout that you have chosen.
So you keep their stuff constant and bring in the other things that weren't there.
Exactly. It's just less cognitive loads rather than
It would be
just...
confusing if your thing was rearranging.
Yes.
And if they work in parallel and they move things around while you are looking at the merging, does it move around as well and like introducing new things and then removing some stuff?
In the merge view, no. Because in the merge view, it's based on your work. You just see the new, you don't see while they're changing their spatial, location.
When does it merge? When does it update?
Every time the system would find a common entity, it would merge it automatically. So
But then would not update it if they moved it after that?
No, it won't. It's going to be a lot of distraction.
Got it.
But if you instantly check the remote, you will see the exact copy of their work. So if they're changing the layout, you'll see the change of the layout every time.
Right.
And then I have another result from you, which thought it's really interesting to go through this one. So hypothesis 4 was less reliance on verbal communication for awareness. And you can see the differences between sticking awareness instances. There was still a significant difference between CLIP and baseline tools. The CLIP version didn't ask as much for, what's going on, seeking awareness, lack of awareness. And they also verbalized their finding less. Because, there wasn't the need to constantly verbalizing what I'm upgrading or, what I'm finding. So there was marginal kind of differences between these two, but they were it was still interesting to see. They asked less questions about each other's finding, and they verbalized their findings less.
What's the x-axis? Number of instances?
Yes.
For one per session?
Per group.
Average across
Yes.
all of them?
Yes.
So in a 40-minute session, you're saying that people move from talking about their findings 12-ish times to 5-ish times? Even that seems tiny. I'm curious what the experience of these sessions was.
Was it kind of
When we were doing the
quiet?
Canberra study, perhaps because we forced people head-to-head, they were talking nonstop the entire time.
Exactly.
Looks like yours was feeling very different from that.
These are only because yes, they were talking a lot for many different, but because we distinguish and differentiated between those, so you see the breakdown here, like this much about, seeking awareness, this much about verbalizing finding, but they had way more, a lot, communicating and, talking about their hypotheses, and so this is just a subset of their conversation.
So you might actually take the total conversation, it might have been constant between them, but the specific ones related to the visualizations might have been fewer.
Yes, exactly.
Got it.
And these were the exact instances of verbal communication that they referred, not anything that we interpret ourselves. So I believe there are a lot of future applications for this project. For example, we are talking with Daniel about extending this LCW notion for different, domains or different problems like co-authoring document, how we can notify people of common works and help them to better do their task, as well as LCW for different collaboration settings. Of course, for example, for distributed, we need other communication channels to help people to communicate, like chats and instant messages. But still, those, subtle visual cue can be helpful for distributed team to know where is a common work and to better coordinate their task. And then moving to the next project, this was actually a shift from my PhD work to a new, work, which was understanding the public engagement with collaboration technology and visualization technology. And this is still ongoing, project. I haven't been done with the results and evaluation, but this is a multi-display environment for people to better understand the community urban planning. And this is the phase of urban planning that the decision has been made, but they invite people to come to this design charrettes or open houses to be involved in this, in this decision making. And people are not really involved in most of those open house, communication. So the main question this group of people from, landscape architecture and community planning at UBC were asking was like how to use visualization and collaboration technology to bridge this gap and to involve people more actively into this design space. So I should mention that this project was ongoing from like 5 years before, between a close collaboration between this department and Kelly Booth from computer science to build up this multi-touch table. And they deployed it in several design charrettes already before I arrived. So this is a picture of those deployment. This is a tabletop where people can just easily work with fluid interaction, dragging and dropping building to the 2D map, and then build a new design. And then it was also based on the idea of if we give them real-time feedback about the 3D on the wall display, which was big, and we were, they were trying to create this immersive environment so people can get a sense of the 3D at the same time. And then at the bottom of the wall display, you can see these numbers and little visualization. It was their attempt to bring people's attention to some of the sustainability metrics. The thing that has been neglected mostly from this, paper-based design charrettes, where people can really see the implications on some of these metrics. For example, what is the walkability of the design that you're making? Or more abstract to show, variables such as CO2 emission of this design, like transportation and stuff like that. So when I arrived, I wanted to answer these questions about the limitation of the single shared display environment to support multi-user interaction, as well as, how we can really leverage that, but by bringing multi-display environment to help people to better interact with all the underlying data. So for this, I started with observing the system in action, interviewing and closely collaborating with experts, which actually took a long time for me to understand this design space and problems and some of the challenges. And then I led the design and mentor 2 students to develop new features. And right now we are in the phase of evaluation. And for evaluation, we are designing this comparative study between this system and a paper-based session. And we are trying to understand what are the effects of this tool to users' engagement, as well as their learning and how they can better interpret the data. So by that, we came up with design objectives of, okay, this was one of the problems that I observed, and it was completely expected from the, videos and system in action. People didn't have a personal display to discover and, customize and work around the data. So that became one obvious problem we needed to address, and also visual history. I proposed my idea about, visual history, and all of the experts were really well received this idea, because one of the main tasks that they're doing is the comparison of their different design at the end of those sessions to make a decision which one is going to be the best. And they didn't have a way to, compare their previous design. So visual history can play an important role here. And it can also not only help them to do their task better, it can also inform us as researchers to understand the model of, this decision making and public engagement and how it works out. So with that, we integrated individual displays, and we designed 3 iPad applications. One was to use iPad as a remote to work with the wall display, which wasn't, interactive before. People had to go around the table and interact with the table to change, any of those 3D wall display information. And also iPad indicator app. In their language, they call those metrics indicators. So we came up with this idea of personal indicators where they could customize and bring their own metrics and get a better sense of those metrics, what they are. And so perhaps it could help them to better be engaged with metrics and understand that, which wasn't the case before, and also the iPad history application. Here's a picture of one of the case studies that I ran just recently. So you see that one of the, it was with one of the experts. So you see that one of the collaborators decided to project his iPad display on the wall to discuss the indicators that he designed. So before, it was just static. This was only here. But with the iPad, they have this interactivity to explore and customize and discuss it with collaborators. And it's also a better way to support individual as well as group discovery. So people could just sit around the table, work with their iPads, or go over the table and manipulate the data. So larger audiences as well. So as I mentioned, this is not still finished, and we don't have concrete contributions, but we are planning to capture a really rich set of data through this qualitative study. Like, the study is going to be 6 people per group, because we're going to see all the subgroups, activity, and the use of different displays and how they would like to work around this multiple display environment, as well as measuring their learning. So going beyond, measuring the interaction and time with each display, measuring how they learn through this, display and interaction technology, their engagement, as well as their collaboration dynamics.
You just answered one of the questions I was going to ask you earlier. So, when we did previous work, we brought in dyads, right? And dyads work very differently from triads. So now you've looked at triads and how they leverage multiple displays and whatnot. And now you're moving on, and I would think that's also very different than moving on to a group of 6, where it gets increasingly more complex. But a further, more abstract question I have is, going back to like 2001, we did tons of work on large displays and people throwing their stuff from their phone to the display and tablets, and none of that ever happened. So, sure, on NCIS, they're all using other devices, and Hawaii 5.0 is using the Surface. But actually, if you go out in the real world, you don't see that often. So is this last group that you're working with really using these? I mean, before you start the study, was that the way they were actually working?
On that large screen.
Or is it all artificially set up so you can explore these questions? Because I'm actually just asking the question, how prevalent is it in the real world that people actually work this way?
It's not
I
prevalent.
didn't think it was.
It's
I wonder
not.
what's gone
But
in the way of that.
yeah, very good question. It was interesting for us. One of the more, different kind of this design shared, they use large surfaces, not interactive surfaces, but just bring large surfaces to be able to share the results of visualization, those heavy GIS-based visualization. And for those, they have to wait another week or so and invite people to come back to those meetings, so very inefficient. And then they present them with this large to create somehow immersive, experiment. And then people just inactively sitting around the table, and someone is
Looking at their own display, which has nothing to do with.
exactly.
It's
They don't
like
have a
just
means
a-
of engagement and interaction with it. So we are trying to change that.
So I guess I'm wondering if it's a technological speed bump, it's,
I
it's
don't
just
know.
that,
I think it
like
kind of was.
doing
I
the,
mean, when we were playing with like the Surface Hub demo the other day.
Right.
It's very clear that it's a whole lot smoother now for me to
Wow, I
take
missed
control
it.
with my laptop and then let you take control with your laptop, and so.
But still throwing things back and forth is not as easy as we envisioned long ago.
In part, yeah, I mean.
Yes, that's exactly.
I mean, he got his iPad hooked up, yay.
Right, I mean, yeah.
But like, someone else couldn't just throw their thing up while he had his iPad up.
I just keep on thinking, they talked about video conferencing for 30
I know,
years
before it actually
before
came to
it just
fruition.
all of a sudden it's
Yeah,
completely
speed is the
commonplace.
same way.
Right, and it's one of those things where you go, it's gonna happen, and then people
Yeah,
keep on
and we
predicting
need
it
to keep doing the
forever.
research.
We
to
are
see
exactly
that-
trying to
yeah.
push
And
that.
in part,
a
we
little
need the
bit
really compelling
forward.
scenarios, right?
Right,
And I
right.
think
Well,
you
sometimes
need
that's
projects
the
like
actual
this to
issue,
help.
because video conferencing was like that, right?
Yep.
There weren't the good scenarios.
So before you go on, could you clarify what you mean by public engagement?
Bringing public. We're inviting public. They could be like residents of those, those neighborhood. And the plan is just to densify, because we need to densify cities, right? So more green environment, green cities. One of the plan is densifications. And then they invite people. So the high-level decision makers have these goals already set, but they don't know exactly how to, design those neighborhoods. So planners and professionals.
Who are the target audience for
Exactly.
the general public?
Exactly what I'm
They
trying to
come
mean.
and then-
So yes, so planners and designers just sit together and come up with some preliminary idea. But the next phase is to invite public. Anyone, any stakeholder who's interested in this space. It could be builders, it could be like media people, it could be residents, it could be older residents, it could be citizens of people. So people are coming from this very mixed, background and expertise. And each of them have different expectation. For example, an old resident doesn't want to see this tall, apartment in front of his own, place, whereas a builder wants to build more and make money. So this is this conflict of,
So related to that, are you allowing them to shift perspective so they can see, like, from their point of view, what the new building would do to their view?
yes.
They are. Oh.
So that's all. That's also always a problem working with 2D only. So we want them to leverage
And
that.
now, presumably this audience is fairly unskilled and not necessarily willing to learn a particular vertical UI.
Yes. The good news is when they deploy this like in 3 different design charrettes, they only gave people 2 minutes introduction of how to play with the table. And people just learn it. Like people from high school and people like more elderly people they invited, they just learn it so quickly. They had never, so the usability, feedback were
got
always
that.
positive. But one of the problem was they were so engaged with the table because it was playful. They didn't really pay attention to those metrics. And
Right.
that's what we're trying to bring more. Okay. Moving on.
By the way, we definitely found when we were doing our tabletop studies that every project would start with 5 minutes of people just sort of like running their fingers along it, going, ooh. So, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So just back to my research contribution, the first phase was proposing this framework for the collaborative visual analytic process and the role of note-taking, and then just investigating the results of integrating this with tool and the LCW methods and new metrics for CBA, as well as metrics for engagement, and more currently, as I just mentioned, the multi-display ecosystem. So my vision for future of this work would be more engaging design, both in terms of collaborative technology as well as visualization. So engagement has been always a center of visualization. We want to engage people, but we haven't had a good way and concrete understanding of how this engagement works. And with, bringing more people to this design space, reaching beyond, expert and analysts, we really need to work on this engagement. And for that, we definitely need to develop more theories about the engagement. And then maybe bringing more design elements to computer science and CS to bridge this gap and reach beyond this audience and explore potentials for multi-touch and touch-based interaction, which is going to really change the way we're interacting with machines, I believe, from now on. So really going and pushing further toward more innovative technologies. And by that, I think that we need to revisit principles for CSCW because it's changing quickly with this new technology. So here are some short-term research goals that I have, and it's based on my previous research about note-taking in different domains and setting, as well as LCW, I just mentioned, for different problem space. And I think learning from this multidisciplinary environment can really inform CSCW in general, so beyond public engagement and this specific domain. But let's go back to the participatory urban design. This is a screenshot of one of the iPads. And as you can see, we have only used bar charts and donut charts with a little bit of infographics in the middle. Because these people really didn't pay attention to those visualization and metrics. So how to bring more excitement and engagement and make them more readable and accessible. This was actually, we bring a little bit more like details so they can understand, for example, for this household energy, where this comes from, like heating and hot water, lights and appliances. So it's really easy to read and work through. But for this, we were only following the suggestions, but people who have worked in years and years with these people in this domain. So they were like, we are only going with bar charts and donut charts. This is based on and we didn't want to push that. But one of my further goals is to really understand how we can create and use different visual encodings to help them to make comparisons and other tasks that are necessary. And then this whole understanding engagement with the granularity and different level, this is the one that I propose in this workshop. For example, people just exposing them to the visualization. And I can see a lot of these reports currently from like visualization community that people were really highly engaged with our tools because we counted the number of interaction with our tool, and it was quite high. So people were actively engaged. And to me, it's just a very shallow kind of coding for engagement. So it just comes here. They just started to be involved and interact. But it can go deeper when we are trying to understand how much they analyze, and then further how much they synthesize and how they made their decision. So if we come up with metrics with different level of granularity, we can better understand the lower engagement versus higher engagement. And for this, I'm working with Jeremy Boy and Heather O'Brien from UBC, who has spent their whole PhD around engagement and engagement theories. So more longer-term research goals, switching to different domains and exploring more ideas about more multimodal interaction for collaboration, as well as I already mentioned that I'm passionate about evaluation methods for both CSCW and InfoVis. Visual storytelling is one thing that I've been always interested to understand how this capturing visual history can help to tell a story about the whole analysis process. But more going forward to understanding the visual storytelling is one of my goals, and visualization for personal discovery. For example, I'm talking from one of the professor at UBC from public health informatics. And one of the problems he tries to answer is like how we should build a UI environment for people with severe migraine headaches. So there are a lot of applications that helps them to record their severity and duration of their headaches. But really thinking about those patients when they're in pain, how they can use, and with the time they get better, there is another attack and they're involved with others. So really thinking about more natural UI environment, user interfaces, it's really helpful. And then bridging between this, computational analytics and design and fine art words is one of my future goals. And there are many InfoVis and CSCW research here at MSR that I found very relevant and in line with what I do or what I would love to do in the future. For example, Michelle and Bill Buxton work around society of appliances, bringing all these devices together, new and novel methods for interaction between these, as well as sketch story and the whole tracking movement that Bangshin, Melanie, Law, and others have been working on is very interesting to me to follow and probably get involved. The Sundance was really an engaging way to, help people to visualize their information, as well as this was a really interesting example of how designers design with visualization. And recently I've been talking with designers about their problems with Adobe Set and how they want more interactivity. Problem is they don't have technical knowledge and background in coding. And finally, biocrystal and bringing more ambient display. So I want to thank all of my amazing advisors that I've been working with, and my co-authors, as well as students that I've been working on with. Without them, none of my work was possible. And here's a link to my slides, to my website where the slides is online. And thank you so much for your attention. Looking forward to questions.
We have a few minutes for more questions. Also, Narges will be around for the rest of the day, and if there's folks who want to be slipped into her schedule, I'm happy to make space. I have one question, actually. You started off by talking about how you wanted to link CS with art.
Yes.
And then you went off and talked for a while about, engagement, and talked for a while about, collaborative visual analytics. I'm not sure I saw where the art theme came back in. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I haven't seen that either. So that's the problem. During my research, I was so involved with this, empowering analysts. And there were some aesthetic kind of investigation that I did. I conducted a user study to see how aesthetics will, make a difference in their experience. I never published it because it wasn't the best time in my work. But I haven't been able to really combine these two. And this is one thing that I'm keen, especially with public engagement and bringing larger audience to visualization and CSCW. I see more linkage between infographics and bringing art elements.
What did you find for how aesthetics affect the analytics process?
Sorry?
You said you have an unpublished paper on that. What did you find?
They really love the way to be able to, first of all, customize their, information visualization. And it really was interesting to see more, aesthetics around it was one of the co-located collaborative tabletop application, which we made some changes in aesthetics, and it was more engaging. They had a way to customize the color and everything and background and work with it, just more nicer to work around their workspace.
Yeah, I think that link between engagement is the sort of focus there, where you have art making things more engaging. Engagementness, although it's difficult to evaluate, and
That's
with
definitely
all the other things, does it really help? Does it not?
So your talk was about collaborative visual analytics, but the kind of work that you are interested in, MSR, the ones that listed, none of them are collaborative visual analytics.
Some of them are, like Michelle's work is for collaboration around,
Most from the WIST side, so they do not really try to
Right.
support the collaborative aspect.
Right,
So
as I mentioned,
are you envisioning to switch your research directions?
that's exactly what I mentioned, visual storytelling and personal health is not collaborative, but still there are a lot of, engagement theme in there, which I'm happy to switch and work in one of, like, the work that Steve has been working on. I feel it has a lot of, potential for collocate and collaborate, bring multiple users to the space to, it was collaborative, wasn't it?
It could be, it's not per se,
But it could
just like
be.
Sketch Insight could be as well.
Yes,
Sort of did that,
because
yeah.
it's on,
Yeah, but I think that's a very common mistake that people tend to think that when you use this largest display, it could be used for collaborative setting, but to make it really like usable for collaborative setting, you need to
The way
design specifically for those.
Yeah.
Because Sketch Insight, it doesn't even support 2 pens, so
Right.
it's kind of a myth that people just get by watching
Right.
people using it in front of a large display.
but it could really inform, the design for CSE,
It was
CVA.
kind of interesting when we did this Squaries stuff. We brought 2 people from many of the different groups because there would often be someone sort of doing the operation and someone else sort of calling out to them. And because they could observe what they were doing from listening, it was almost inherently collaborative. And so, oh no, add this, and oh, do this. So that was kind of interesting. See, again, that form factor really does encourage that kind of thing. But you're right that it has to have a little bit more to support it.
Okay.
Okay.
In that case, thank you very much.
Thanks so much for your attention.